Hello, and welcome to the Oregon Business Matters podcast, brought to you by Oregon Business and Industry, your statewide Chamber of Commerce. At Oregon Business Matters, we focus on insights, issues, and initiatives that impact Oregonians' shared prosperity and the state's economic health. I'm Angela Wilhelms, President and CEO of OBI, and your host here at Oregon Business Matters. Today, I'm talking with Trevor Giroux, President of ATI's Specialty Alloy and Components Division, located in Millersburg, Oregon. ATI is a Dallas-based company that produces materials, mainly metals, designed to withstand incredibly harsh conditions. Like in rockets. ATI's Millersburg facility, part of the Specialty Alloys and Components Division, has a long and rich history in the state. It's one of the largest employers in the region, and it might just be one of the coolest Oregon companies you've never heard of. I had the pleasure of visiting the facility a couple of times recently, including when it was a stop on OBI's annual Manufacturing and Innovation Roadshow. It is fascinating. It's innovative, highly scientific, and complex, but I'm going to leave it to Trevor to elaborate, especially when it comes to the science part. So, Trevor, thank you for joining me today.
My pleasure, Angela. Thanks for the invitation.
Yeah, all right. So, in the simplest terms, let's just start with the basics. What does ATI Specialty Alloys and Components do in Millersburg, Oregon?
Ooh, simplest components.
And I know our tour took about 7 hours, so...
We would have done 14 if you'd given us the time. Simplest is we are a mine-to-metals company. And so what we do is we take raw earth ore from around the world. We chemically separate it into its pure periodic table elements. We will then use electron beam melting or different vacuum arc remelt technologies to be able to mix the different ingredients from the periodic table in that we want into an alloy system. Then we'll take that metal and we will grind it, crush it, forge it, extrude it, do whatever we need to do to it to turn it into a final product that'll end up going to the customers, the OEMs, or one of their subs.
That's great. And we'll talk about some of those products here in a minute because it is so remarkable. The diversity of where your products end up is pretty incredible. But before we get into that and more and talk a little more about the metals you refine, I want to step back a bit and talk about your location. We were just discussing this before we started recording. You and I were actually both coincidentally in Alabama at the same time. You were there in Huntsville because that is a location of yours, which, there's a significant aerospace industry hub there, so that probably makes some sense to people. But Millersburg, Oregon might not make sense to people as the second location, but the facility's been there for decades. So tell us a little bit about the history there right along I-5 leading up to present day.
This is my favorite piece as an Oregon native of Oregon history that I never knew until about 3 years ago, which is unique since I drove past it every other week going back from Oregon State University to take my laundry back to my parents' place up north in Portland.
I should say, if people have driven up and down I-5, heading into Albany if you're going south or coming out of Albany if you're going north, you have seen this facility.
You absolutely have, and you probably wondered what in the world they do. And you mentioned kind of the decades of being in place. We actually turned 70 this year at the end of the year, which is a great milestone for us. And it's very tightly linked to that important piece of history. So after World War II, and as we were looking at nuclear technology and what the next applications were going to be for it, there was a under the cover of darkness, hush-hush selection process for developing the next materials to allow nuclear energy or specialty energy to kind of be the focus of that work. And in a very strong competition between the entire country and especially in the Pacific Northwest and surrounding regions, there was an effort to find a place that had great access to water, which is one of the reasons why Albany, Oregon was considered with the hydropower there, had access to zircon beach sand, which is out in Coos Bay, some other places in the Northwest as well. And then ultimately it came down to some really shrewd negotiating, including some of the civil leadership of the city laying down in the tracks as the train with the deciding commissioner was going by and deciding that he needed to have a second look at the operation. So what was ultimately done there under Admiral Rickover and the cover of darkness and plenty of secrets, there's a great book out there called Secret Science and Submarines that details it in history. We developed and produced on Christmas Day 1956 the world's first nuclear-grade zirconium product. And the reason why that matters is because zirconium is perfectly transparent to the neutrons that like to pass through between uranium and be able to power a nuclear reactor. And so if you want these atoms to be able to interact and move back and forth and essentially be the gas of what goes into a nuclear reactor, you need nearly pure, we'll just call it pure zirconium. And that's what this site was initially developed to do. From that point on, it decided that after proving concept, they needed to industrialize it, and so take it from lab scale, which had really been the work that had been done to that point in time, and bringing in a corporation at that point in time, Huacheng, which is often what we're colloquially still known as in the area before ATI, then ATI Teledyne purchased the business, and it was really brought up to scale. And so it's not only a proud fact that this little pocket of Oregon is the birthplace of commercial nuclear power, but those first pieces of metal went into the USS Nautilus, which went under the ice caps, went into the very first nuclear reactor out in Shippingport, Pennsylvania. And from that point in time, we're in about 30% of the nuclear reactors around the world and every Navy nuclear vessel that's there.
Yeah, I mean, okay. I know a lot about Oregon history. I didn't know this story either, and it is so cool on so many levels. And we could probably in a whole nother podcast episode unpack the irony of Oregon being the birthplace of this technology and product and our current relationship or lack thereof with nuclear power ourselves. But that's a different episode. That's not why you're here. So we'll just let that one go for now. But what was the name of the book again?
Science, Secrets, and Submarines.
Okay, I'm going to pick that up. So you mentioned nuclear applications just now, but tell us about, and I know we don't have time for you to go into all of the product applications that your metals end up in, but talk about some of those that I think would be most fascinating to our folks, because listeners, this is going to range, you're going to be mind blown here a little bit. This is going to range from aerospace to high-tech medical and a whole bunch of other things. So I'll let you share some of your favorites.
It is the reason why this is my absolute favorite business in the world. It's not only the markets, but how different our manufacturing processes are. So if I stick with the zirconium discussion, zirconium naturally occurs with hafnium, and I'm going to throw out a whole bunch of elements that sound like I'm making them up, but you can check them out. They're in the upper left of the periodic
table. They
are.
I fact-checked after my first visit because I made the joke that they sounded like Marvel comic made-up things, but they're on there.
Trust but verify. So zirconium occurs as 50 parts to every 1 part of hafnium in the world. And so what we do through this chemical liquid-to-liquid extraction separation, which is the really tall buildings that you see when you drive by, is we separate that zirconium and that hafnium element. Then as we go through the other operations that I mentioned, converting it into metal through vacuum melting essentially, and then forming it through a variety of different methods, at that point in time, we have pure zirconium that is going into the fuel cladding. It actually goes around the uranium that's loaded into a fuel bundle and can go into any nuclear reactor in the world. We're agnostic to what the technology is. We can do anything for anybody. And then you have the hafnium, which is essentially the brake. And so if zirconium allows everything, all the energy to pass through, the hafnium is, imagine a control rod, is what stops it. And so as you push that up and down, you can stop, you can throttle up or down a nuclear reaction. With that, you can imagine that specialty energy and certainly nuclear energy is a huge area of play for us. And so when you look at, we're the name of record for all of the unenriched uranium reactors, which are called CANDU reactors, and really proliferated out of Canada. We can also do enriched uranium reactors, and we participate in about, as I mentioned earlier, 30% of the nuclear energy in the world. And when you look at the growth that is happening, especially domestically, the investments, tens and 80s and 40s of billions of dollars that are going into supporting everything from data centers to energy scarcity issues, both here in the States and then around the world. It's a really exciting time for us. That same technology is used to make vessels go and stop. And so if it floats or sinks on the water, it has our material in it. If it's nuclear powered, especially for the U.S. and then through AUKUS, that's the U.S., Australia, and the United Kingdom as well. So that's kind of the heartbeat of our business, and that's really what got us started. After you've developed and perfected these separation efforts, as well as the ability to alloy different pieces together, you start to wonder, well, what else existing around us in the periodic table would make sense? And so as we understood the ability of hafnium to act as a stopping agent, or also to be able to act as a refractory element, which effectively means it can go very, very hot places. We actually are the name of record in what is called C103, it used to be called columbium, and it is the material that's used for second stage rocket boosters. It's material that's used for hypersonic, so anything Mach 5 or higher flight. And it is where you put metal where you need it to operate beyond where it physically should be able to still stay within its form. And so we support the largest commercial launch platforms that are in the entire world from a rocket launch standpoint. We are on the cutting edge of the hypersonic development with those materials as well. As you mentioned, we play in a bunch of different and strange areas. One of the other things that niobium, which is one of the elements that I just mentioned, can be used for is in superconductors. And so when you have niobium and titanium, you can create a very low temperature superconductor that can then be drawn and wound into magnetic resonance imaging machine, the magnets that actually power those. So we participate in the medical markets there. We do a nickel titanium, which is a shape memory alloy, incredibly useful if you want it to be one size and shape at room temperature and a different size and shape at, let's say, 98.6 degrees, or the temperature of your blood and body. So these are what are used for medical stents, allowing them to be shaped at one size to fit into a catheter at ambient, inserted, and then to grow and actually hold open your arteries or go in and pull out a brain clot if you need to.
Yeah, I mean, these are things you certainly don't think about. You just want them to work. You want the stent to do what the stent is supposed to do, but the science behind that, apart from just the medical science, the engineering and chemistry that you're talking about, and that you gave a statistic, and I apologize, it's escaped the top of my mind, but you had an estimate for how many of the MRI machines out there that you guys are probably in.
Yeah, for the past decade, we produce 70 to 80% of what's available around the world. And so if you know somebody that has had an MRI, and certainly if you know somebody that's had a stent put in, it's likely material that's come out of Albany, Oregon.
Yeah, that's, again, something people wouldn't know driving up and down I-5. So that's very good. Well, the other thing I think is interesting is, we've talked about your work to refine the alloys for other folks to put into their products, but you also take some and make your own products there at the facility as well. So you're pretty vertically integrated in some of your business lines.
We are, yeah. The vast majority of the work that we do would be considered mill work, I think, where somebody's getting in a piece of material that's either really long and round, or really long and flat, or some sort of smaller sheet. But we're actually able to take material all the way through into a final component. And one of the other interesting things about ATI at large is that most of our materials, some of our largest customers, are other ATI businesses. And so when we're selling these metals that we make that go into our Charlotte, North Carolina plant, or if they go into our Wisconsin facility where they're then forging rotor blades that go into helicopters, even if we don't do a final product within one of the Oregon or Alabama sites, we can ultimately see something that's pretty near net to what it's going to look like when it gets installed on, in those cases, most often an aircraft.
Yeah, that's interesting. So in simplest terms, you take the raw materials of different sorts from around the world, as you mentioned. You refine them, you ship them. That is a lot of global logistics when you're talking about the presence you have in end game products. So talk a little bit about just that supply chain management. I mean, obviously tariffs are a big topic of conversation still in economics today and business practices, but beyond just that, there are the supply chain management of this is extraordinary. So I'd just love for you to reflect on that for a minute.
Yeah, absolutely. It sounds like you're completely vertically integrated when you're taking it from the mine as kind of that sand or ore and into a final metal, but how it gets to us and, certainly where it goes from there is always a topic of conversation. I'll talk about maybe the niobium product for a moment. So that the largest reserves of that in the world come out of Brazil. And so as we look at the tariff activity that's been happening with Brazil and what has or has not been on an exemption list, it's been a tremendous amount of work in terms of, as we go through negotiating future contracts, many of which we've been in the middle recently, how we talk to not only our customers, but ultimately our suppliers in those mines. And one of the things that we found a tremendous amount of success in has been made in Americas, plural. And so we have found, because of the supply chain disruptions, because of the, we'll just call it concern over security of supply, there has been a willingness by, these are not short-term relationships. Everybody's protecting or saving lives. So we are in it for, a very large mission and for a very long time. And so when we kind of brought this problem up and said just passing tariffs around to one another is ultimately, and squeezing pennies is not going to, protect the supply chain in the long term, what do we need to do? And we've actually been able to move upwards where we now have 4-party agreements that we historically, folks would have been arm's distance from one another, that are now saying, listen, everybody from the folks that are actually pulling out of the mine to the final original equipment manufacturer agreeing to how we're going to, protect where we can the end user from these price increases, and really coming across the table with the level of transparency on how do we all collectively win instead of one person winning and the others, kind of sinking and breaking that supply chain. So those are conversations that we probably wouldn't have had without the scarcity concerns of the past year.
Yeah, that's it's just so complicated, and the ability for companies to think nimbly and creatively, like you guys have done, never ceases to amaze me. Tell us a little bit also about your focus on reuse and recycling. I mean, you're talking about a product that's extracted at the very beginning of its life, and so there's obviously going to be folks who are concerned about the environmental considerations when you're refining that, but the recycling operation on your campus is really, really impressive.
I mentioned we have many, sub-businesses that seem completely different in their own right. Our recycling is almost one of them. It's a proud fact of ours. We don't throw anything away. And so as you're getting chips or dust, or even if you make something wrong, we can put it all back into the pot at the beginning. We get to restart the recipe, we get to remix the components. So not only is there not anything on site for us that we can't reuse, but we also work very closely with our customers to make sure that we're getting any odds and ends from them that they can't use through their process that they return to us. One of the more interesting ones is through the semiconductor manufacturing work that we do, where we're part of the atomic deposition layer process. And so you end up with a lot of our material on the wall of a fab that is mixed with other suppliers' products or other people's products. And what we're able to do is reintroduce it because of our separations capability, where it can go back to the very beginning and we can get all of the rare and the important elements out that people need. And so, one of our core tenets has been, how do we make sure that there isn't waste in any of these industries as we really look around the world? So we've done a tremendous effort to, of course, there's always a balance sheet reason to do it as well, but it's great to be incentivized to go out and make sure that we can absolutely maximize the utility of every ounce of product that we make.
Yeah, and it's clear that it's in the ethos there on the campus. The other thing that's clearly in the ethos on that campus is how you and other leaders in the company think about workforce, but also how the community thinks about the company. Just yesterday I was at the Albany Chamber, and your company is very involved locally in the community, and you can actually see people's faces light up when they talk about the company and what it means to the workforce in that community. So tell us a little bit about both the regional impact and workforce, and then also, how you think about finding those workers and what you guys are doing to continue to meet your own demand.
It's, I mentioned I'm an Oregon native. I've moved away 13 times trying to find a place that I like better. And when we came back this time, the family burned the boats and the boxes and said, we're here. And so I couldn't be more elated that we're in a community where it feels like this could be your forever home. And it really is driven in many ways by the way that ATI is entrenched there. And it's not just the paycheck dollars that come back for our 1,163 people that work there. It's the amount of just general care and stewardship for the communities nearby, understanding that we're the best paying facility within 70 miles for blue collar workers, best within 50 miles if you want to have anything to do with the sciences or the chemistry, the pieces that I've been talking about, material science. And at the end of the day, the philanthropic effort isn't something that the company has to lead in any way, shape, or form, because people know what's needed in the community, and the requests that we get at our door are incredibly salient and things that we can see the result of. And so it's been just tremendous to watch, and it's been this way for a long time. But to see how Albany reacts when ATI decides to go and do something, and when ATI makes an investment, and when ATI is hiring, because these are generational jobs. When you talk to anyone of our operating team, their biggest going concern is, how do I make sure that my job is available for my next of kin or for my neighbor 70 years from now, because I never want to work anywhere else. And I've never been a part of a business, especially within the mill products world, where that's been the sentiment.
Yeah. And what about your partnership with Oregon State University and the MECOP program there?
That, as a Beaver myself, very, very biased.
I thought that might be the case.
As a participant in MECOP, very, very biased. And I'm happy to say that it has nothing to do with my bias that ATI has been so entrenched with Oregon State and with these programs. When you think about just the breadth of what Oregon State University offers, and also Lynn Benton Community College locally, especially in the trade side, it is everything that we need, and what we need is kind of rare. It's finding chemists, finding people that, they are subject matter experts in the entire world. When you look at our staff of research and development and the PhDs, they are the first call for not only customers, but for research universities and national labs. And to be able to go down the street and have each and every one of these functions and capabilities being trained and educated and immersed in culture that's 20 miles away, we're incredibly fortunate, and we couldn't be happier to return that favor with Oregon State, making sure that we always have space for 20 plus MECOPs every year, constantly bringing on interns, constantly finding ways to better partner with the universities and with the community colleges locally, both in terms of sponsorship as well as creating just those educational opportunities. And post-COVID, there's been a lot of hiring challenges around the world. And I've lived through many of those in different businesses. We don't have that. And I think that speaks volumes to the relationships that we've built and also the careers that we offer.
Well, you and I have talked about this too. I mean, we're both natives. We love this state. We are glad to have you back and the family with you. But no matter how wonderful a state is and how great the business is going and doing, any location comes with benefits and challenges. And so, let's talk for just a second about what some of those challenges about operating a business in Oregon are for you from the ATI perspective.
Yeah, go back to the reason why we're here. Cheap, plentiful power, and a community that would lay down in the tracks because they wanted that business there, and they were going to free up whatever tape was preventing them from doing it. And at the startup of ATI, and when it was still the Albany lab, they were moving buildings up and down the neighborhood. It was the entire community participating, and how do we figure out how to make this place survive, and willing to be able to participate in that big bet. And that feels different than it does today. It's, I mentioned the markets, or at least some of them that we participate in, and I skipped aerospace, which I don't think my boss would accept, so I'm going to highlight that as well, aerospace and defense-based. In most cases, we pace our customers' growth because what we make is not available somewhere, incredibly long qualification times, whatever the reason may be. In many cases, it's kind of a one-to-one. And so as every market grows and has double-digit CAGRs and people want to figure out how quickly they can get ahead of their competition, we've seen a lot of interest from our customers in customer-funded capital to help us grow even faster than ATI and the shareholders can support. And that's incredibly exciting. It's also been an area of concern for us because when we look at these significant investments, not only for our own capital, but for our customers, putting everything in the middle of the table and saying, we're betting on you because otherwise nothing else works. And then if we can't give them any sort of insight into how long it's going to take for permitting, or as we go through, climate protection and Cleaner Air Oregon and all these other initiatives, are we going to be able to put in your new furnace, your new widget, your new whatever it may be? We can't take that money and make a commitment that they can go and then sell to their customers if we don't know that we can execute on the build out. So my biggest concern is, if we can grow here, I should probably be concerned of, can we stay here? Just when you look at the heightened restrictions, and we're a clean operating plant. I mentioned some of the recycling. There's thousands of other initiatives that make us a really good neighbor. But it is, if you're making products at scale and you need heat and energy to be able to do it, it's not just the pay to play to be able to go and have the utility support you at a premium. Will the state even allow it? It is our number 1, 2, and 3 question.
Yeah, it's just sad and frustrating to hear, because these are products, like many of the products made around Oregon, that are going to be made. The demand for them is there. Someone's going to make them somewhere. Why not this company that started as the lab, pioneering technology in Oregon, in a community that can use these 1,163, I think you said today, jobs, with all the ethos and things that make Oregon great, but we get in our own way, and we got to stop doing that. So thank you for sharing a little bit of that, and we'll keep working on some of those issues with you.
No, and we appreciate all the work that you and the group are doing. Like I said, the family doesn't want to move again, so let's figure out how to grow here.
Okay, we'll do it. We're going to keep. What we always say is it's about letting businesses here survive, thrive, and then getting them some more friends to play with. So that's what we'll keep focusing on. Well, you were a stop, as you mentioned, on the Manufacturing and Innovation Roadshow, so thank you for having us. Just putting it out there, we're going to open nominations soon for our annual Coolest Thing Made in Oregon competition, so maybe you can go back to the team and figure out which of your many cool products you might want to put into the mix for that bracket-style competition. But we are, unfortunately, just about out of time. But before I let you go, is there anything you want to share about the company for our listeners that we haven't touched on yet?
Yeah, I'd love to talk about the cool product, but I'll find another time to be able to do that.
I know. See, listeners, he was teed up to maybe have to pick his favorite product, but I have been scolded by one or more guests on this program about having to pick their favorite children. But if you've got one you want to mention, I will take it.
Yeah, so there is fusion technology. So I talked a lot about fission and nuclear. Fusion being that clean perpetual energy that's always been 10 years away. Well, now they're starting to sell and actually make these reactors. And there is only one metal that can exist in what is both the hottest point in the universe at being hotter than the temperature of the sun when this plasma is reacting, and also the coldest when these superconducting magnets are operating at the temperature of space. And that metal is vanadium. And we have melted vanadium for the very first time at a commercial scale, really anywhere in the world, and for us since 1993 at a pilot scale. So that is something, when we talk about fusion energy and clean energy for the world, that is something that our group is incredibly proud of.
That is a fascinating story, and I think definitely wins a cool product title of some sort. Whether it wins our bracket at the end of the day, that's up to the voters. But 'tis the season for bracket-style competitions, and so we'll launch ours here pretty soon as well. Trevor, thank you so much for joining me today. Thanks for what you and the team at ATI do to support the community and your workers, to support OBI and the work that we do. We're very grateful for the commitment that you guys have made to Oregon's economy.
Yeah, thank you for the time and just the joint and mutual appreciation of how incredible Oregon is and how hard we should fight to make sure that continues to be true.
Yeah, well, Trevor, Giroux, thank you for joining us today, and thank you, listeners, for tuning in. The Oregon Business Matters podcast is a production of Oregon Business and Industry. Our episodes can be found online at OregonBusinessIndustry.com or, of course, on all of your top podcast platforms. Please check it out, subscribe, and we'll talk to you next time.